All right, welcome everyone to our weekly lecture series, Naturalist Nights. This program is brought to you through a partnership through Wilderness Workshop, the Aspen Center for Environmental Studies, and the Roaring Fork Audubon. My name is Howie Kuhn. I'm a naturalist here at Alces, and I would definitely love to invite you to any of our programs to next week's lecture, which will be a film screening actually, called A Fierce Green Fire, a battle for a living planet. And it's my pleasure tonight to introduce Stephanie Duckett, a wildlife biologist with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. But before I do that, I'd like to highlight some of the sponsors that make this program possible each and every week and every other week in Carbondale possible. And tonight's feature sponsor is Sterling Creek Properties. And Stephanie Duckett is right here to my right. She is a wildlife biologist with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And she has been working for Colorado Parks and Wildlife since 2001. She started off as a wildlife officer, and then since 2004, she's been a wildlife biologist. And tonight's talk is on moose, and I would cede the floor to Stephanie to talk about these lovely animals. So, Stephanie Duckett.
Thanks. Watch the course. Well, I made it up here without tripping on the cord, so that's really a good start. So thanks for having me. I think we'll go through the talk, and then at the end, if you guys have questions, please feel free at the end to ask those. Make sure we got everything going right now. So Colorado Parks and Wildlife, many of you have probably heard of it as Division of Wildlife. We manage wildlife and their environment here in Colorado, and we're tasked by state government to protect, preserve, and enhance the wildlife for the benefit and enjoyment of the state and its visitors. And we're, believe it or not, tasked legislatively with using hunting, trapping, and fishing as the primary methods of effecting necessary wildlife harvest. So we're directed by the legislature to use those tools to manage wildlife in Colorado. So we manage all the wildlife in Colorado: amphibians, reptiles, birds, fish, and mammals. What about domestic animals? No. This is my horse's chance to be a star. He's pretty excited. What about feral horses, the wild horses you see down near Cameo? You think we manage them, or do you? Very good. Bureau of Land Management. The BLM actually manages wild horses, believe it or not. A little weird administrative stuff, but that's true. We don't manage wild horses. So I used to do a pop quiz on our state animals. We'll skip it for you tonight. So a painted turtle is our amphibian. Lark bunting is the state bird. Greenback cutthroat trout is the state fish. And the Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep is our state mammal. So here is the pop quiz, though. What percentage of your state tax dollars go to Parks and Wildlife to manage wildlife in Colorado? 0. Very good. I like it. Wildlife management in Colorado is funded by sportsmen, so through hunting and fishing licenses, and then excise tax on sporting goods, and then Great Outdoors Colorado, which is your lottery dollars. So buy your lottery tickets if you want to do good things for wildlife. We don't receive any general tax money for wildlife management. So enough of that background stuff. Let's talk about moose. And all the photos in this presentation were taken on the Grand Mesa. Some were taken, and when I refer to Grand Mesa, that flows all the way into like the Crystal River Valley and down into the Carbondale 3-mile, 4-mile country too. And Aspen, we'll talk about that in a bit, but the Aspen and the Roaring Fork and Frying Pan area is kind of an expansion of 2 different herds into that area. So I generally call it the Grand Mesa because that's where they started and that's where my home is. I'm not based out of Grand Junction, but it includes this area as well. 2 syllables, very easy. So Moose Biology 101. They're in the deer family, part of the same family that has mule deer, white-tailed deer, black-tailed deer, caribou, elk, and moose. And you can see these three silhouettes. The dark one, of course, is a moose. You can see his shoulders up top. I apologize, I'm short. You can also see the outline, the silhouette of an elk, and then the antlers coming back, and then finally a deer. So this slide gives you an idea of how much larger they are than elk and deer. It takes a minute to pick that out, those silhouettes. But that gives you an idea. They're very, very large in relation to both deer and elk. They're found throughout the Northern Hemisphere, so Siberia, North America, Europe, and there's different subspecies worldwide, 6 different subspecies. We actually have the smallest subspecies here in Colorado. It's the Shiras or Shiras moose. Most people say Shiras, but I've heard Shiras as well. They're found throughout Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and Montana. And they're the smallest of the subspecies. You also have Alaskan moose, Siberian moose, western moose, eastern moose, and those are found in the very northern part of the U.S. And North America. And then European moose are found in the very northern parts of Europe, Finland and Sweden. Yeah, actually, they are. Good pick, yeah. They live about 10 to 15 years in the wild, and they breed in September through November. They have a black body and then those real light silver legs. That's common on all the adults. Their front legs are actually longer than their hind legs, and then they've got that big old bullwinkle nose with the bell or the dewlap hanging below. That gets older with age, and there's a lot of question about what that's actually used for. There's some speculation that it's used during the breeding season, that males use it to spread scent. And that's probably one of the better ideas, but nobody's actually really all that sure. They're generally solitary, but like anything with wildlife, as soon as you make an assumption or you make a broad statement like that, something flies in the face of it. I've seen a group of 7 different moose all herded up in one really small area, so nothing's ever true completely, but they're generally solitary. They don't herd up like elk and deer do. They spend most of their time in riparian or woodland habitats, and they're browsers. They don't graze on grasses. They eat twigs and shrubs, willows and aspen. Moose is actually derived from the Algonquin word for twig eater. So they're browsers instead of grazers. They really don't migrate like deer and elk do. Deer and elk spend most of their summer up in the high country, and then they migrate down when the snow gets too high. And they can withstand really deep snow. They don't even bat an eye with 5 feet of snow. It's just no big deal. They really don't have any natural predators of adults in Colorado. Mountain lions and black bears will get calves sometimes, but the adults, once they're just so big, they really don't have any natural predators here in Colorado. So males are bulls. Here in Colorado, the Shiras subspecies weighs 750 to 850 pounds. They have those palmate antlers that look like your hands rather than the tines for deer, both deer and elk. Those photographs show pretty well. They look like the base of your hand with small fingers sticking off. They shed those antlers every year, and they immediately start to regrow them, and they've already started shedding them. So if you see a moose right now, you need to look and see if you can see those little buds, because they may have already shed their antlers even if they are a bull. So the bulls may not have antlers right now. They do fight for breeding rights, and they'll defend a territory, the bulls will, during the breeding season. Cows are much smaller. They don't have antlers. They have a much smaller dewlap as well. And they weigh about 500 to 700 pounds. And you can see in this photograph right here, they have a white patch on their rump. So that's the best way to tell the difference between a bull and a cow, but you do need to get them to turn around and show you. So this time of year anyway. And that cow actually was right near Hughes Reservoir in the 3 Mile area above Carbondale. That photograph was taken. They generally, the young are called calves, and they generally have 1 calf per year. Twinning is very uncommon, but it's a good indicator of excellent habitat. And it's actually a management indicator that we look for. When they have high twinning rates, it means that the population is growing, which means the habitat is good. if there's very low twinning rates, there's something going on with the population. Probably the habitat isn't in good condition. They're born in mid-May to mid-June in Colorado, and they're that reddish-brown color. They're a real nice mahogany color. And they usually stay with the cow until they're a yearling. If the cow doesn't have a calf the following year, they'll usually stick around, maybe not real close, but they'll stay in the same area. I go out every year and check all of our collared cows to see if they have calves. And I've run into cows with their yearling calves with them. There was one cow that had twins every year, and those twins might not be with her if she had had another set, but they'd be within a mile. So now, quick little history of moose in Colorado. There's always been moose in Colorado, just in very small numbers and never really in good self-sustaining populations. This is a float from an 1896 parade in downtown Denver. And those are not real animals. They're taxidermied mounts. There's a coyote and a fox and an elk, and then there is a moose there. So this is really early evidence that there's always been moose in Colorado. Excuse me. Right now, these are the self-sustaining populations for moose in Colorado. This is the area that I am calling Grand Mesa. And these M numbers are just administrative designations so that we have a number to refer to stuff. But this is the Grand Mesa population. This is based out of Creed. There's one up on the flat tops, and then the North Park, Middle Park, South Park is kind of your traditional moose that have been here since the 1970s. These are all a result of reintroductions or introductions, depending on the verbiage you want to use. What we're seeing right now, this is Glenwood Springs right here, and what we're seeing right now in Aspen is the moose from the Grand Mesa moving over into the Crystal River Valley, but then also there were some moose that were translocated in 2008 south of Gunnison to augment that Creed herd. Those animals have actually started moving up north and joining up with the moose from the Grand Mesa. And those are the animals that you guys are seeing in Aspen and along the Frying Pan and Maroon Bells. There were 6 animals that were transplanted south of Gunnison, and they actually all moved out of the area. And the 2 that have spent the most time here is a pair of twin calves from 2008, and they moved up and they are responsible for most of the animals that you're seeing in the area. So they've been reproducing and doing really well, I think with a little help from our Grand Mesa moose. So that's the origin of the animals that you're seeing in the Aspen area. If you see those green ear tags, anybody seen a moose with a green ear tag? Okay, those are the animals that were on the south end of Gunnison. We didn't put any out on the Grand Mesa with green ear tags. Ours had yellow and orange. So we do know who's who, believe it or not. So this is just a closer map of the area that we reintroduced moose into. I think I have a laser pointer here. Let me see if it'll work. No such luck. Anyway, so you've got Grand Junction on the very far west end, and you can see Aspen on the very far east end. And this is generally the area that we expect them to be pioneering into. And when I refer to this DAU, this is what when I refer to this herd, this is the general area that we're talking about. So a history of the moose in the area. In the early 1900s, there was the Battlement Mesa Forest Reserve was established. And that's what is now the Grand Mesa National Forest. And the first supervisor there wrote a letter to his boss in Washington, D.C. and said, wow, the wildlife is so rich and so abundant. There's deer in plenty, a few elk, and a very few moose. So that's, again, good evidence. There were moose here, just not very many of them. But with lax fish and game laws, commercial hunting, we really lost all of the moose in the area except for a few random stragglers. But people were always seeing them too. And there is a cow moose in that picture, just for the record. It's the Where's Waldo picture. Right there. Some of them are Where's Waldo pictures just for fun. So why did we want to put moose on the mesa? Well, watchable wildlife. People love moose. I think you guys are all evidence of that. People love to go watch wildlife. There was strong support from hunters. And then economic benefits. You know, people come to North Park specifically to see the moose. So the economic benefits were there too. The guy holding the moose antler there is Dr. Bruce Bowerly. He's a professor of biology at Colorado Mesa University in Grand Junction. He was one of the original proponents of the project. And it was a huge project. There were a lot of partners that helped out with it. We worked with the Forest Service and with the State of Utah Division of Wildlife Resources to bring most of the moose. A couple of different energy companies actually contributed some funding. They donated a vehicle to the project for monitoring. Oxy and Gunnison Energy helped out with that. And then the Safari Club International also provided quite a bit of support. And auction and raffle license funds, every year we have 2 licenses for each species. One is auctioned and the other one is raffled off, and they're valid for each species. There's one for deer, elk, moose, sheep, goat, pronghorn. I think that's it. And those monies are available to, for people to apply for to do projects to benefit wildlife in Colorado. So that's where most of the money came for this project. So in spring of 2001, 2 members of the public, one of whom presented last night in Carbondale for Naturalist Nights, Roger Schenkel, and then Dr. Bruce Bowerly came to us and said, hey, what about moose on the mesa? And we said, well, everybody loves moose. We'd love to have moose, but we kind of need to do this right. And so we started in fall of 2001 with a feasibility study, and I'll explain more about these in a minute. We did a feasibility study of, hey, is this really a good idea? What does the public think? And then we went ahead and did a vegetative assessment and said, can the habitat support this? Okay, if everybody wants them, but can the habitat support it? We combined those 2 and had a final report on the feasibility study and the vegetative assessment in spring of 2004. And then we went to the public and said, okay, here's what the habitat can support. Here's what the people think. Tell us what you guys want. Ultimately, people said, bring them on. So we moved moose. The first moose that were moved were in January of 2007, and we moved moose through summer of 2007. January 2005, excuse me. And we moved 91 moose. We'll go more in depth in just a sec. So there was a lot of controversy about whether this was a good idea or not. When I talked about whether you wanted to use reintroduction or introduction, that really was a big question on people's mind. Are these a native species, or are we just putting another mouth to feed on the landscape? And that's where the vegetative assessment comes in. But talking with people were really comfortable with the fact that there is enough evidence that these were a native animal, and they continue to show up in small numbers. And then also the benefits that we talked about. The feasibility study, we actually went up to North Park and talked with a lot of their livestock permittees to talk about how moose have impacted cattle grazing. We also talked with our biologists and different agencies up there, including the Forest Service, on the impact that another mouth was having on the landscape. We also made the commitment to study the vegetation. And there were some concerns, but there's also really strong interest and support. Here's my other Where's Waldo picture. He's just peeking out. He didn't know we could see him. So when we did this feasibility study, there were some pretty major concerns. Damage to riparian areas. Those areas along creek beds and lakes and streams and rivers are really sensitive habitats. People were very concerned that we not let the population get so high that we do damage to those habitats. Livestock permittees were concerned that we would reduce grazing allotment numbers in response to having another mouth on the landscape. Impacts to aspen regeneration, that's a concern across the entire West, the condition of our aspen forests. So that was a big concern as well. Fence and hay damage on private landowners was a big deal. Disease, moose can carry and transmit diseases that can affect both cattle and native wildlife, like tuberculosis, brucellosis, and chronic wasting disease. And then people were concerned about the potential for moose coming down to ranches in the winter and causing problems, kind of damage, but also some nuisance issues, and then We all know moose are not sometimes the nicest of animals. So those were the concerns, and so those were things that we took into account when we did this project. And we wanted to address those before we brought animals in. So in summer of 2002, we did the vegetative assessment to try and get an idea of how many moose the habitat can support. Well, what habitat do moose love? Willows, right. Okay, so we said, you know what, let's assume that moose will eat approximately 30 to 50% of the annual willow production. And that, based on other studies, is an amount of utilization that willows can actually thrive under. They do find, if you get above 50%, you really start hurting those willows. So about 30 to 50% of their annual production. We based this on willows only for two reasons. One, moose like willows, but two, willows are also the least common habitat across the landscape, very small areas in relation to anything else. So this is a very conservative estimate intentionally. We based it on adult forage rates, and at any given time, about a quarter of your population is going to be calves. So again, we did a very conservative estimate. And what we estimated is that above 7,000 feet, the winter willow habitat could support between 278 and 464 moose. And that's a very conservative estimate, and it's willows only. So that's what we've used as our good starting place. So in the summer of 2004, we went back to the public in Cedar Edge and in Grand Junction and said, okay, here's our concerns. You know, we potentially could have some problems with roadkill and the potential for human injury. When you get into a wreck with a moose, you're going to notice it a lot more than deer and elk. Hiker and moose conflict. You know, there's somebody was just telling me a story a little while ago about running into a moose on Conundrum Creek, and you know, the potential is there for them to be difficult. So we talked with the public, and ultimately all of the input that we received was in very strong support. The Forest Service was supportive, livestock permittees were supportive, so we said let's go for it. So starting in January of 2005, we brought moose to the Mesa, and we did it two ways. The top one is a moose wrapped in a burrito. This is officially the coolest job in the world, I gotta say. They net gun the moose. Drugs are really hard on animals. If you think about when you go into the hospital for surgery, you have to sign all those clearances and waivers about anesthesia. It's doubly hard for a wild animal. You don't know exactly how much they weigh. You don't have all the machines monitoring them. So drugs are really challenging when you're dealing with wildlife. The preferred method is to actually net gun them. You net them from a helicopter. They wrap them up, they hobble them and blindfold them. Moose are incredibly docile that way. They settle down immediately once they're blindfolded. And we'd bring them to our horse trailers, load them in a horse trailer, and then release them on the Grand Mesa. The other way that we did that is in that bottom picture. That bull is actually in an elementary school yard in Utah. And when moose got into inappropriate places in Utah, they would dart them and then bring them over to us in horse trailers. So those are the two ways that we did it. And so we brought a total of 91 moose over. 5 of them actually came from Colorado, 3 from Creed, 1 from No Name, believe it or not, a bull. I don't know, maybe you guys might remember that. There was a bull in No Name in 2005, just randomly showed up and was eating someone's tulips. She wasn't very happy about it. We said, we'll take him. And then 1 cow showed up in the motor pool yard in Colorado Springs at Fort Carson. And we said, we'll take her too. The rest of them came from Utah. The majority of them came as those helicopter net gunning operations, but just about split evenly almost. We got some singles as well that were in schoolyards or near highways, that kind of thing. All of them were marked with an ear tag like you'd see on a regular beef cow and some kind of a radio transmitter. We gave them antibiotics, preventive, and then we wormed them as well. We tested them for chronic wasting disease, and I apologize, but brucellosis and tuberculosis aren't listed there, but we tested them for those two. And then we released them in 3 main areas: the very far northwest corner of the mesa, the eastern end of the mesa, and then the very far south. Skyway, right near Powderhorn. Harrison Creek is east of Colburn, and then Muddy Creek is down near Paonia. Excuse me real quick, I'm just going to take a quick drink of water. So, from 2005 to 2012, we've been monitoring them very diligently using radio telemetry. We've been looking at what habitat they're using, what elevations they're using. Are they really staying above 7,000 feet in elevation? What kind of slope do they like? Do they like really steep slopes or more flat slopes? How big are their home ranges? And then we've also been looking at mortality causes. What has actually caused every single mortality that we've had? Has it been predation, old age? What's causing mortality? And then their age when they died and what their general health was prior to death. And then every year, this is the toughest part of my job, we go out and we get a visual observation on each cow to look at reproduction. It also gives us an idea of some group size, some their general health, and how well they're reproducing. So those twinning rates that I said are a good indicator of the population health. That's something that we've been documenting every summer. In addition to that, the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, we actually manage everything by objectives. So we set management objectives for every single big game herd, and then we manage the population to meet those. And generally what we do is we manage for a population size objective, how many animals we want on the ground, and then a composition objective, how many males per female do we want, and that's generally an indicator of hunting quality. So we completed our herd management plan for this population using a public process in 2008, and it was finally approved in 2009. And what we decided, remember that 278 to 464 animals that the willow habitat could support? We selected 300 to 400 moose as a suitable population size objective. And then our composition objective is to have the minimum number of bulls per 100 cows to get the job done, as it were. And then we want a minimum 5-year average spread of our harvested bulls to be 35 inches. And for those of you that are hunters, that is a very good quality. It's a balance between having lots of licenses every single year and having very, very few licenses, but a really high trophy quality. So we went for a balance. We wanted to kind of get the best of both worlds. So we're working for 35-inch spread over the course of 5 years. So where we're at right now is we have 5 cows that are still cooperative and their collars are still functional. Those batteries die. They're only guaranteed for about 4 years, so we're actually lucky that some of the batteries are working at all. Our 2013 population estimate is about 435 moose, so this population is growing dramatically. We've started seeing expansion into new areas. We've got very high levels of twinning and really very good high survival rates. That all adds up to a population that's climbing dramatically, and it's expanding into new areas like we're seeing around here. Here's an indication of what our population is doing. You can see it's just growing dramatically. So some of our initial response to those concerns that we were worried about in the beginning, we haven't had any damage claims or any nuisance situations, no encounters with hay or fence damage. I did have a woman call and say, I think I have a moose in my yard. And I said, okay, well, you know, what does it look like? And she said, well, it's brown. And I said, okay. Well, what is it doing? And she said, well, it just walked over my fence. And I said, that's a moose. It didn't even need to jump it. It just walked right over the fence. So no damage to fences or hay or anything like that. We haven't had anybody with concerns about damage. We haven't had any chronic wasting disease. All of the animals that we brought over were free of CWD, and then there's no issues with tuberculosis or brucellosis either. We haven't had any human injuries, although we have had quite a few moose vehicle collisions, surprisingly enough. There was a cow that was killed over on Highway 65. The only thing I could figure was that it had to have been the snowplow, because nobody called to report it, and all I could figure was that, you know, it was snowing heavily, and did a lot of damage to her, and for somebody to not notice that, it had to have been a pretty big vehicle. So I'm assuming it was the snowplow. There's very little riparian utilization, which is shocking, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. But these are very unusual moose in that they don't like willow habitat. What's really neat is we actually do an annual Grand Mesa Moose Day on at the Visitors Center on Highway 65 between Powderhorn and Cedar Edge. And every year we've averaged about 700 people that come to that. And we have lots of activities for the kids, hikes where you can learn about radio telemetry and tracks and scat, and lots of fun stuff for the whole family. But it's pretty amazing how many people are interested in the moose. So forage competition is always something that we're worried about, that extra mouth on the landscape. The good thing is that these are browsers, and so there's very little dietary overlap with elk and domestic livestock. They both eat grasses. They graze. The primary concern would be with mule deer, which are browsers and which share a similar diet. So winter is the time of limited forage, of course. That's when nothing's growing, and so that's when the problem is. The good thing is that what we're seeing is there's virtually no overlap in the winter range. Those moose are not dropping down in the winter, and the deer are. They're dropping down to much lower elevations, so there's no direct conflict during the winter. In addition, those moose, you saw that slide with the silhouettes, they're taking a bite at mouth level up here, and the deer are taking bites at mouth level down here. So there's actually, amazingly enough, actual spatial competition in a single plant, which is good. And then we have relatively low moose densities. In that area of 300 to 400 moose, we've got about 30,000 mule deer. So I'm going to run you through a few of the results from the last few years, and I'll try not to get too down in the weeds on the stats and science. And so here's every single location through 2012. Each little blue dot represents a single moose location. I'm going to walk over here real quick. This is the Skyway area just above Powderhorn where we released moose. We released moose on the Muddy Creek drainage. Actually buried here is Paonia Reservoir and McClure Pass. Here's two more release sites. This is Vega Reservoir near Colburn. And then up here, this is Sunlight Peak, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. So you can see they've really expanded into new habitats, and they've really moved out from where they originated. I'm going to show you just an example of home range size. We've calculated that for some cow moose that have over 75 locations. There were certain animals whose battery, the collar malfunctioned, or the batteries died, or they just refused to cooperate, or we didn't get that many locations for whatever reason. It's highly variable, but everybody wants to know what's their home range size. So to give you an idea, we're going to use what's called minimum convex polygon. And the way that works is each blue dot on this map is a single location for a single cow moose. And right in the center there is, this is on the very east end of the Grand Mesa, east of Colburn. So what you do is you draw a polygon using the outermost locations. And so it's the very minimum. You know for sure that they used that area. So just drawing this for this one cow, she used what you can see is about 20 square miles. The average was about 82 square miles. The largest was 213. She actually ended up up above Carbondale. And then the smallest was that one that I just showed you, 19 square miles. There's a lot of overlap among cows and very little overlap among bulls. This sounds about right. Each of these colored polygons is a different cow moose. You can really see that they used very similar habitats in just a little different manner. So that the red polygon is a single cow, the yellow polygon is a different cow. So that just gives you an idea. They're really using the same habitats. Reproduction has been very, very good. One thing I want you to see is that these are from collared cows. These are only cows that have collars on them. And so you look at the very top row there, it's the number of calves that we actually saw on the ground. So in 2006, we saw 8. In 2007, we saw 18. Keep in mind we're still moving animals at that point, so some of these are animals that were bred elsewhere. So they actually calved calves that were bred somewhere else. What's interesting, or not really interesting, is 2008 and 2009 we saw 21 each year. 2010 and 11 we only saw 14, and the reason for that is our batteries were dying and we just didn't see as many calves. We didn't have as many cows on the ground. So the ratio at the very bottom is the most important. So the first 2 years, the ratio, we had 37 calves per 100 cows, and you can see from 08 on, the ratio was above 66.7 every year, which is very, very high. So that's great. Great news. Elevation selection, for those of you who are familiar with the Powderhorn area, this will give you an idea. 3% of the locations are below 7,000 feet. 28% are between 7,000 and 8,000 feet. 60% of the locations are between 8,000 and 9,000 feet. 8% are between 9 and 10, and then only 1% of the locations are above 10,000 feet. They really prefer that 7,000 to 9,000 feet elevation band, and that's below the rim of the mesa, for those of you who are familiar with that. What's interesting is this shows how very little they're migrating during the year. Each column is a different season. You have spring, summer, fall, and winter. And you can see that there's slight variations. Each band is the elevation. So the white at the very bottom is below 7,000 feet. And you can see that they never more than 4% of the locations are below 7,000 feet. There's a slight bump during the winter. That next band is between 7,000 and 8,000 feet. And you can see they use that just a little bit more in the spring and winter and a little bit less in summer and fall. So you can see they're really not changing what elevations they're using very much at all. They're still sticking in that 7,000 to 9,000 feet. And what's interesting to me is that they actually drop down a little bit in the spring, and I think that they're dropping down to catch that quick green up, the early green up. They drop down, and then once the green up goes up the side of the mountain, they go follow it back up. For land management, this is just kind of an interesting thing. Across the entire area, we have about 35% Forest Service land and 48% Forest Service land, and then 35% private, 16% BLM. And the moose are choosing to use about 67% Forest Service land, and so greater than its availability. They're using a lot of private lands, or excuse me, Forest Service land, so we aren't having the conflicts that people were worried about. So that's a nice treat too. For survival rates, our survival rates have been very, very high, averaging 92% for bulls and 91% for cows. I think that's a little high on the bulls simply because our sample size was quite a bit lower, and the bulls were notorious for destroying their collars and their solar-powered ear tags. They were much more adept at that. So we've had 42 known mortalities, and that doesn't account for the collar batteries that have died. We just don't know what happened. The majority have been unknown. When we've gotten to them, there's just nothing there to tell us what happened. We've had some that are directly capture related, and unfortunately that's something that does happen. We were at about 8%, and generally, although nothing should be acceptable, it's fairly common that as high as 10% can happen. It's something that we work really hard to avoid, but particularly with those, I'm sorry? What does that mean? Directly capture related, usually what happened is they overheated during capture, and these were almost entirely animals that were in a nuisance situation or in an unsafe situation, and they had to be darted using drugs and moved during the hottest time of the year in the summer, and they overheated. That was, I think, well, that was all of them. So it's too bad. The thing is the only saving grace on that one is that they had to be moved anyway. They were going to be moved anyway for the safety of the animal and for the people. So there's been 5 legal hunter harvests. We did have a cow that died while calving, and then we've had 1 confirmed and 1 possible illegal kill. For vegetation, The moose are using about 3% of the moose locations are in willow riparian areas. 4% are in conifer areas. About 7% of their locations are in sage and mountain shrub mix. 27% are in aspen. And this is it. This is the kicker. They love oak brush. 44% of their locations are in oak brush. It's really unusual, but the good news is there's no limit to the oak brush. So to give you an idea, this is just a pie chart showing what I just showed you, which is 27% of the locations are in aspen, 44% are in oak, and then only 3% are in willow. That's compared to what they have available to them. Now, other is big in this because other includes all of the different habitat types across the Grand Mesa, including pinyon juniper and stuff that they aren't really using, but we have to include it. But what's interesting is that 44% of their locations are in oak brush, and only 20% of the habitat that's available to them is oak brush. So they're actually selecting it about twice as much as what's available, and that's what's really interesting. They are truly choosing to use that habitat. And willow riparian is 12% of the habitat, and they're only using it 3% of the time. They're specifically choosing to go to oak brush habitats instead of willow riparian areas. So this is a quick information about harvest. So far we started harvesting in 2009, and we're shooting for that 35-inch 5-year average spread. We're actually at 39 inches. We did have a harvest in 2013, and unfortunately the stats aren't available yet, so I apologize. But harvest has been very, very good. Trophy quality has been very good. So where are we going now? We're going to keep trying to manage to those DAU plan objectives, the 35-inch spread and the 300 to 400 moose. You can see that's going to be a challenge looking at that population chart. We'll continue monitoring using harvest information and annual classification flights. But we've also started a project just this summer that is also, again, funded by those action and raffle monies, looking at occupancy and vegetative monitoring. And we had our first antlerless harvest this year to try and slow that growth curve down and keep it within the realm of where it needs to be. So this occupancy monitoring, you saw there were huge holes in that map of where the locations are. Well, are they not there, or did our callers just not go there? So that's the first question we're trying to answer. We want to monitor their movements as they pioneer across the landscape. And we're basing it on elevation and vegetative types. And we're doing, this is another tough job, walking transects looking for moose poop. It's a great way to spend the summer. So we're also going to be putting out 10 more callers this winter to ground truth and maintain that data set on the vegetation that they're using. We're actually probably going to start that either tomorrow or the next day, so that'll be good. It's much more accurate and frequent locations. It's incredible technology. We're really lucky to have it. Let's see. We're going to also look at the vegetation that's up there. We based our population objective on willows, and now that we know that they're choosing to use oak brush habitats, we really probably should evaluate whether that population objective of 300 to 400 moose is really a reasonable objective or not. So we started in 2013 measuring the actual productivity. We're using a very similar methodology to what they used in 2002 to estimate the productivity of the willows, and we're using it based on the main habitat types that they're using. So we're checking Gamble's oak, chokecherry, various mountain shrub species to look at the productivity and see if we need to revise that population size objective. We're also going to be looking at utilization to monitor how much of the forage they're actually using. And what I'd really like to do, and we're going to start that this spring, what I would like to do is use that as a hands-off tool to monitor this population. So instead of having to put hands on animals, which although it's fun and it's why we all get into jobs like these, it's not good for the animals. What I'd like to do is come up with a metric that will allow us to monitor the utilization of the forage annually to predict the population trajectory. So that's what we're hoping to do with this current project that's coming up. And we're hoping to use that combined with twinning rates and be able to improve our monitoring techniques that way. This is just giving you an idea. There's 115 cells, and we're going to be doing the transects in all of them. It's the same area. It's everything above 7,000 feet. Real quick, here's Grand Junction. Up top corner is Glenwood Springs. Aspen's way down here. So that'll give you an idea of where we're looking at. But we're running transects across that entire area, so you may see or hear from us as we're out in the field. When we did go out and do we completed 24 of the 115 cells last year. 19 were occupied, 5 were not occupied. That says, wow, our collars weren't telling us very much. There's huge expansion of uncollared animals. What's interesting is of those 5 cells that were not occupied, 4 of them were above 9,000 feet, which is kind of what we expected. They're really using that 7,000 to 9,000 feet area. So they don't seem to have expanded much up into elevation. So we'll continue doing these occupancy transects next year on different cells until we've got all 115 done. And then we worked on our productivity stuff, and we'll continue doing that. So just a quick note about moose viewing now that we've done all of our science stuff. Don't approach moose if you do see them. They have very few natural enemies, and so they're not fearful of humans. What the most typical scenario is somebody will be out walking their dog off a leash. The dog will see the moose, bark a couple times. The moose will say, "What's that?" "That's a wolf." Go after the dog, and the dog runs back to its owner, and the owner gets trampled. So that is the most frequent cause of moose conflicts at least in Colorado. So if you see a moose, if you think you're going to be in an area where there are moose, you want to have your dog on a leash. If you see a moose, back away, stay calm, and try and climb a tree. This is actually my technician. He went out with Dan Gray with the Forest Service, and Dan had from the story that I've heard, a very cute volunteer with him. And she was trying to take pictures of this cow that had twin calves, and she wasn't getting good enough pictures, so Luke volunteered to take closer pictures. Yeah. So he ended up in the tree for about 45 minutes before that cow left. And you know, he's the one that should know what he's doing. Apparently he was not. He got way too close. So it's kind of funny. It's all fun and games because it turned out well. But if that tree hadn't been there, and it's not a very big tree. So, yeah. So respect them. Some areas to go. Right around Highway 65 on the Grand Mesa is a great area to go. And then actually the road that goes between Silt and Colburn and Paonia is a very good way to go. So if you wanted a nice drive, you could go up Highway 65, then drive over to Colburn, drop down over into Paonia using McClure, and there's really good moose sightings pretty frequently around there. And the one thing that seems counterintuitive, don't forget to look on those oak brush hillsides rather than just looking in the riparian areas. So, anybody have any questions? One last thing. Oh, if he looks like that, you should back away. Don't keep taking pictures. So, go ahead. Thanks. Oh. Huh? Oh, okay. Repeat the question. Okay, go ahead.
How fast are they?
The question was, how fast can a moose run? And I think they've been clocked at speeds of like 40 miles an hour, way faster than me. And they can do so very soon after birth. Yep. Go ahead.
What's one of your most interesting behavior stories that you've collected?
The most interesting behavior story I've collected is probably the 7 that I found yarded up in that really small area. There were 7 moose in this, in an area, I would bet it was under 2 acres. It was during the rut, so it's not quite as surprising, but there were 4 bulls and 3 cows, and they were all just hanging out and eating, and everybody was nice and calm. I was going in to check one of the cows to see if it had a calf, and it's really unusual to see that many moose in an area, so that was probably one of the most interesting behaviors I've seen. Yeah. Go ahead.
Since they don't go down during the winter time, what are they doing in the winter to stay alive?
Okay, the question
What is their winter?
Uh-huh.
What are they doing?
The question is what they're doing during the winter since they aren't migrating down. And they're uniquely adapted to really deep snow in that they have those long, thin legs so they can actually walk through the deep snow without getting high-centered, as it were. But they can also forage well above the snow line. And so they're eating all the shoots off of the willows, the aspens, the oak brush. And for them, it's really not a bad time of year, simply because they can forage at such high levels. It's not that tough at all. It's actually, as a corollary to that, which I should probably include in the presentation because I think it's so interesting, there's some recent research showing that above 30 degrees Fahrenheit, moose are using more energy to stay cool than they ever do to stay warm. They don't get cold, they get too hot. So, yep. Go ahead. White jacket.
How many moose are there in the Aspen area, and have you seen any over in Snowmass?
It's hard to say how many moose are in the Aspen Snowmass area because they are pioneering in from other areas. And it's also hard to put boundaries on where that is because they are so fluid. I would expect that just, let's say from the Crystal River Roaring Fork entire basin, I would bet that there's probably 25 to 50 moose. It's really hard to give you a good estimate though. It's my best guess.
Have you seen any over in Snowmass?
The question was whether anyone's seen any over in Snowmass. I haven't gotten any reports. You guys probably have more information on that than I do. Has anybody heard of any moose in Snowmass? No? Okay. Go ahead.
Is there any evidence that they do or don't eat Gamble acorns?
I don't know of any evidence of them actually eating acorns. The question is whether they actually eat acorns or if they're just browsing on the twigs. From everything that I have seen, they've only been eating the twigs, but I wouldn't rule it out. They're very nutritious and highly palatable.
Is that a scatological sort of?
You know, pie in the sky, I would, yeah, that's exactly it. Next year, I'm going to incorporate in my funding for fecal composition analysis, so I may actually know that this time next year. Go ahead.
Can you tell us the projection of the population for the next few years of the moose population?
A projection for the population of the moose total for the next few years is going to be entirely dependent on what we see with this productivity project. When we write a management plan with, in this instance, 300 to 400 as our population size objective, we commit as a agency to follow that. And so we are obligated to maintain the moose population as close as we can to that 300 to 400 moose. When you see those twinning rates and you see the survival rates, we're going to have a very hard time to do that. So that involves antlerless harvest to try and keep it low, but it also involves us working really hard to get this project done so that we can come up with a better estimate of what the habitat can truly support based on what they're really using. We estimate about 435 right now, and that could be potentially as high as 500 without harvest by this time next year. So we really need to stay on top of it. Go ahead.
Are they good eating?
The question was if moose are good eating, and yes, it's delicious. It's very good meat. It's even, as a hunter, I eat a lot of elk, and it's even better than elk. So, Go ahead.
It sounds from everything you said that there's a lot more of them, or potential for more of them now than there were historically.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a hypothesis as to why the land can support now than 100 years ago?
The question is asking why populations are increasing so dramatically now and what's changed from 100 years ago. And this is speculation. My personal opinion is that because moose are not very social, what we were seeing 100 years ago was animals pioneering into new habitat and then saying, oh, there's nobody here. And what I think that we've done is given them the jump start to be able to expand and really be self-sustaining. I think that in addition to that, because they don't have natural predators, especially in Colorado, they are particularly susceptible to market hunting and being overhunted without any regulation, and that I think has played a bigger role that just isn't a problem now. It's so tightly regulated now. Go ahead.
Are the auctions and the lottery or the raffles, are they for Colorado residents only?
No, anyone can participate. Mm-hmm. And the question was whether anyone can participate or if only Colorado residents can participate in those auction and raffle licenses. And we're very accepting of anyone that wants to participate.
How many licenses are given each year?
Each year for the Grand Mesa area, we last year we issued 10 cow licenses and 8 bull licenses. And I anticipate that we'll have either 8 or 9 bull licenses in 2014, and then somewhere at 10 or above for cow licenses. We set our license numbers in March after we have harvest statistics and after we have all of our modeling done and everything, so I don't know for sure. Go ahead.
Is there any way to report sightings or observations of moose or cat?
Yes, we would love to have any information you can provide on sightings. I will figure out a way to put my phone number up on the screen here in just a second, and you can give me a call and report that information is really valuable. All those blue dots on the map, a very high percentage are from public sightings, so we really appreciate them. Go ahead.
In other areas of the country, such as the Tetons and Yellowstone, what is the primary source of food that those moose are eating up there?
The moose in Yellowstone and Grand Tetons and almost universally across the Northern Hemisphere is willows, riparian vegetation.
Okay, so can you explain, or do you have a thought about why they're eating oak scrubbush here? Are they migrating, or?
I think that the reason that these moose are choosing those oak brush habitats is because it originally developed in Utah. That's a native herd that we used as our source herd in Utah. They've lived in the Wasatch Mountains there's never been any kind of augmentation or introduction. It's a native herd, and they evolved in that area eating oak brush. And so that's their natural habitat. And it was kind of serendipitous that we got those moose. They were having an overpopulation problem, and so we offered to help out. And so we ended up with those moose instead of a different subpopulation, just as a matter of chance, and we've been really lucky with it. Go ahead.
So because they eat twigs and like black bears would be eating the acorns, they're not expected to compete with black bears for forage, are they?
I wouldn't anticipate that moose will compete with black bears. Moose are very specific to twigs, and if they do choose to eat the acorns, I think it would be mostly opportunistic. Black bears are incredibly opportunistic in their feeding, and they can eat just about anything. And I don't think that will be a huge limiting factor. Thanks. Yeah.
There have been reports about significant declines in moose populations elsewhere. Montana, I think like northern Great Lakes area and
Yes.
New England. Are you in contact with other biologists about sort of the success in Colorado and how that's contrasted against what it seems like is happening elsewhere?
Yeah, there are significant moose declines throughout their range, particularly in North America. I'm not familiar with other areas such as Europe and Siberia, but there are significant moose declines in a lot of the populations throughout North America. And I think there's research going on in all different populations right now. Alaska, Yellowstone, the Tetons, Wyoming, lower Wyoming, all over to try and figure out what the causes are. And right now, it's very, very early in the research, and it's very early in the declines too. But it's starting to look like the causes are very site-specific. In one area, it could be increased predation. In another area, it could be either insects or parasites. And so in another area, habitat declines are, for certain in Alaska, habitat declines due to overpopulation are the issue. And that research is actually really well developed. And so I think it's really site-specific. It's a very good reminder to us, particularly the situation in Alaska, to maintain our populations well below what the habitat can support. It's a lesson to us. Go ahead.
In the bear and the elk, there's been some of the chronic wasting disease. Any in the moose?
Moose have been diagnosed with chronic wasting disease. There was one in North Park, which is actually the reason that we ended up with the Utah moose. We were originally going to use North Park as a source herd. When we had an animal diagnosed with chronic wasting disease, we said we don't want to worry about that. So we went to an area of Utah that was chronic wasting disease free in both deer and elk. And so chronic wasting disease can infect moose. We haven't found it yet on the Grand Mesa. And deer and elk are both incredibly social animals, and moose are not, generally. And chronic wasting disease seems to be much more prevalent in areas with high interaction, areas with really dense populations, such as Boulder, or areas where there's feeding, so concentration of animals. Luckily, moose, just in their natural behavior, are probably going to be much less susceptible to chronic wasting disease, which is kind of nice.
For these auction licenses, what's the average winning bid that it costs?
The average winning bid on the auction and raffle licenses, I don't know. It's really variable by species, but I couldn't even give you. Oh well, the only one I can't think of the moose one right now, and I apologize, but I know that a mule deer one recently went for $30,000, and that's for mule deer. So I can't remember moose though. I'm sorry.
And is your job just moose, or do you do all the?
My job actually involves fur and feathers, just terrestrial species. So I don't do aquatic stuff. So I do fur and feathers. It just depends on the day. Moose, bighorn sheep, deer, elk, mountain lion, bear, some sage grouse. It just everything. Go ahead.
Would they be more sociable if they had more predators around? Would they bunch up more?
In areas where there are more predators, moose don't appear to be more social. There doesn't appear to be safety in numbers. So in areas like Isle Royale, Michigan, where there are a lot of wolves, they don't seem to be more social, no.
So wolves are predators?
Yeah, wolves are a natural predator of moose, and then so are grizzly bears. Yep. That'd be an ugly fight, too.
Well, I am sure that Stephanie has some time for a few more questions, but right now I'd like to invite you all to take some literature from Wilderness Workshop and ACES on your way out. And thanks, Stephanie, for presenting this wonderful talk tonight.
Yeah.